Okay, no intro as always, let's just jump straight into the video. Today we shall be covering which Imperial Guard regiment is the strongest. Now, due to me, not being suicidal, we shall of course not be covering every single Guard regiment, but rather just most famous and influential ones. Now, before we start, we gotta set the scenario alongside some rules based on which we're gonna rank them. Number 1. Each Imperial Guard will have its own homeworld for support. Imperial Guard shall be fighting for a random middle planet in between their own homeworld and the enemy guard's homeworld. And number 3, Imperial Guard has to be able to take both the middle planet as well as the enemy's homeworld to win. I think you can already guess that this ain't the best way to measure the capability of different guard regiments, because this scenario heavily favors the attrition / manufacture centric ones. But taking time frames, success rate, resource intensity alongside conditions and geography of different types of planets to judge guard more accurately would easily make this video 3 or 4 times longer. Unfortunately, college has been fucking me over recently, forcing me to study 9 hours a day, so I don't really have a strong inclination to spend another 9 sitting in a chair writing a script, so we shall be judging them by the parameters set above. So let's start off with our first regiment, which will be the Rambo cosplayers, also known as the CATACHAN. Hailing from the world of, surprise surprise, CATACHAN, should you ever go and visit it, you're gonna encounter such wonderful things like the CATACHAN Devil, known for shrugging off heavy boat rounds and seeing space marines as an easy protein source. They are also the size of a fucking train. There are also blood wasps, known for digging into your flesh and eating you alive, alongside drake bats, which are ogre-sized bats able to devour you in one go. I think that it's important to mention that although drake bats tower over normal human beings, there does exist one strain of subhumans that still remains larger than them, known as Walmarto Americano. With all that being said, you probably think that due to CATACHAN being a lush jungle planet, you might be able to hide somewhere behind the vegetation in the forest. But you'd be sorely mistaken, because you'd be hiding behind such wonderfully named plants like the brain leaf, Venus mantrap, strangle plant, all of whom do exactly what you think they do. Not even breathing air is safe, courtesy of the spore trees and Kanak floaters, which, as you can guess, release spore that kill you. Night Lords did try invading CATACHAN once. They failed to conquer it, but it did become their world, their permanent resting world. As it turns out, you can't terrorize that which is unterrorizable. You can already guess that such harsh conditions forced settlers that landed at CATACHAN to evolve, and they needed to do it quick. Remember how I said that even space marines like the Night Lords died to a man on CATACHAN? Well, the main reason was that the establishment of the FOB, Forward Operating Base, meant for resupply, extraction, medical care and communication was just impossible to be established on CATACHAN. This was due to a fact that flora and fauna of the world were able to sense heat and vibration irradiating from the machines needed for construction. This inability to create permanent settlements forced almost all the surviving settlers to become nomads, greatly limiting their numbers. In war, they only have 12 million people, which is half that of their real-world counterparts, the Australians. Albeit, they are much more powerful than your average sober Aussie. Okay, I think you get the point. They live on a hellish world that shows no mercy, so even their newborns have six-packs on birth. Let's get to their tactics and strategy. Their regiments are mostly consistent of light infantry forces meant for easy movement through broken terrain and concealment. They can carry some heavy weapons like the heavy bolters, but these are only assigned to company or brigade units, and such are designated to lower level units only if their mission requires it. CATACHAN are mostly used as elite shock troops, saboteurs or guerrilla fighters, or in some cases even infiltrators. This is not to say that they can't hold their own in a fair fight. They almost certainly can, and they usually beat enemy forces 4 to 5 times their number with ease. It's just that they are usually too valuable for such missions. I mean, would you want your special forces to be sitting in some random ditch in the middle of nowhere? Artillery does not discriminate after all, and even though soldiers from CATACHAN can easily survive their limbs being blown up, they'll still need time to recover and heal, and also of course the prosthetics. When it comes to their chain of command, it's heavily dispersed and modular. NCOs and officers have a high degree of independence and freedom of movement. If the unit loses communication with the chain of command, the commanding officer of that unit has full discretion on whether or not he wants to continue with the mission or abandon it, which will of course depend on the circumstances on the ground. As you can guess, this does complicate the chain of command's task of maneuvering its units and deciphering where they are. But due to CATACHAN being a hardy bunch, you can almost always assume that even if you lose contact with one of your units, they're probably not destroyed, but rather behind enemy lines causing havoc and clapping cheeks. Nevertheless, losing track of your units in most circumstances is not good, as such they are next to always used in spec-off and shock troop roles. Another downside to them is their lack of mechanized or even motorized elements alongside heavy or even light artillery outside of some small mortars. They do have some, but not a lot. They usually have to rely on allied formations to provide artillery fire or mechanized vehicles for breakthrough operations. Which of course from strategic level makes sense. They are a light infantry force after all, but in this theoretical scenario it is quite a large downside. So to quickly go over their pros and cons. First up, we got the pros. CATACHAN is a death world that will require vast quantities of resources to even establish a small foothold upon. Every CATACHAN guardsman is easily worth 5 to 10 regular guardsmen on their own. They are able to wage exceptional guerrilla warfare. They are a light infantry force, and as such they are exceptionally good at crossing broken ground terrain or any geographical obstacles such as rivers, mountain ranges, jungles and more. It's almost impossible to destroy their chain of command due to their excellent small unit leadership and tactics. Now onto the cons. A lack of heavy weapons, a lack of mechanized vehicles such as IFVs, AFVs, tanks, SPGs, SPAs or even SPAs, a lack of motorized vehicles such as trucks, a lack of manufacturing sites on the planet, lack of artillery, and worst of all, a very small population of only 12 million people. Okay, that's enough for the CATACHAN. Now it's time to talk about the regiment that eats artillery shells for breakfast, lunch and dinner, the Death Corps of KRIEG. The Death Corps of KRIEG hails from the, you guessed it, KRIEG. Yeah, Games Workshop ain't subtle like at all. KRIEG is also a death world, just like the CATACHAN, but far more hospitable. You know that CATACHAN is a hellhole when an irradiated planet with no vegetation that has rivers of liquefied poisonous gas flowing on it is considered paradise compared to it. Kriegsmen of course are still human, so even they can't quite live on what's essentially New York's sewer system but an entire planet. So embracing their Viet Cong and Hamas heritage, they dug an entire network of underground hive cities connected to one another through underground tunnels. In these underground cities lie enormous manufacturing sites operated by workers who care for nothing but to work in order to gain a sliver of the Emperor's mercy. These hive cities also house enormous algae farms meant to fuel the workforce alongside human processing machines meant to turn dead people into corpse starch, which is 41st millennium version of spam. There are also cloning farms. They are pretty self-explanatory. Kriegsmen are almost suicidal when it comes to combat. They are willing to throw down their lives at a moment's notice if ordered to do so. Their training consists of such harsh psycho conditioning that whenever they eventually encounter eldritch horrors beyond human comprehension, their immediate reaction isn't to curl up and die, but rather to hit it with a shovel or rip its face off with your bare hands. Doomguy would be proud. Their actual training ain't much better, with them having live fire exercises, being sealed in gas chambers, having to survive surface of their planet, alongside many other challenges. The reason why they are willing to go through all of this is due to their code of sacrifice. Code of sacrifice being an ideology that states that because half of their ancestors rebelled against the Imperium, they have all committed a great act of sin. As such, they and their children have to sacrifice anything and everything in order to gain even a sliver of the Emperor's mercy. Hatred towards yourself and your ancestors ain't something bad, it's a virtue. So it would appear I was wrong. Due to their hatred of themselves, Kriegers aren't descended from Palestinians and Vietnamese, but rather from white Americans and Western Europeans. Okay, so what are their tactics and strategies? Well, Kriegsmen have a highly hierarchical structure of command and strict obedience to your superiors. If your commander hasn't given you an order to do something, then you just don't do it. Theoretical example is that if you have some concealed fighting position in a forest somewhere that's overlooking a road, and let's say an enemy baggage train approaches, if your orders are to stay put and not engage the enemy, you will stay put and not engage the enemy, even if you can easily wipe out the enemy force with a quick pursuit. As you can guess, this way of fighting has a lot of flaws, but gives an excellent view of formation positions to the generals of the Krieg forces. And in all seriousness, due to the way in which Krieg fight, it does complement them quite a bit. And the way in which Kriegsmen fight is one word: artillery. The first step is Kriegsmen digging in, just outside of the enemy artillery range, then using aerial and space assets to find enemy artillery positions, and if possible, use of servos calls for confirmation. Once enemy artillery locations have been selected, Krieg's heavy artillery is supposed to obliterate them, after which Kriegers move their trench lines closer to the enemy. After which it is the job of light and field artillery to obliterate the enemy's frontal positions. From then on out, infiltration teams should be sent out to achieve a beachhead, from which further reinforcements might arrive to support the takeover of the enemy trench line. After which Kriegsmen are supposed to not follow the retreating enemy force, but rather to reinforce their captured positions and move up the artillery, tanks and mechanized elements to protect from a possible counterattack. As you can already guess, this method is highly resource, time and manpower intensive, but if done properly, it almost never fails. When it comes to the population of Krieg, we don't know it exactly, but we do know that they send out approximately 50 million troops annually, and we do know that they produce ludicrous amounts of equipment, so they would probably need a large workforce. So using estimates, it would probably be somewhere in the high billions or even low trillions. Okay, with all that said, let's cover their pros and cons. Pros. They live on a death world with no vegetation for the enemy to be able to feed off, alongside toxic air, so you need gas masks to even breathe on it. They have unbreakable morale and suicidal fervor. They have enough artillery to block out the sun. They have enough mechanized and armored elements to defend against most of the enemy armored attacks. They have almost assured artillery superiority. They use chemical weapons so that they can kill any enemy dumb enough not to carry gas mask without even having to fire a single las bolt. They also have excellent logistics. Okay, with all that said, let's go on to the cons. In their way of war, they use heavy amounts of material that could be better used elsewhere. They also have poor exploitation of breakthroughs. Also, they have a quite primitive use of maneuver warfare. Next up, we have the homeless, I mean the Cadians. Okay, we'll be picking them prior to them becoming space hobos, so whilst Cadia still stood. Cadia is a fortress world, meaning that every street, every building is militarized. That's about it. I don't have much more to say about it. It's quite simple. When it comes to Cadians, they are just your basic bitch regiment that almost every other unnamed regiment is modeled after. They don't excel at anything except one thing, but are good at everything. Their only defining trait when it comes to their military are their shock troops, which are said to be the best in the entirety of Galaxy. Their soldiers are also trained from birth, so they are quite well trained and fanatic. To this day, they still repeat Cadia stands. It doesn't, but cope is a powerful drug. Also to mention, they are also greatly psycho-indoctrinated, just unlike in KRIEG's case where military and clergy do it. On Cadia, people just naturally get hardened by the fact that every night you might just encounter Mandela catalog like horror show. With that said, let's go over to the pros and cons. Pros: excellently trained soldiers, planet-wide purchase, decent population of 850 million, excellent morale/cope, best unmodified human shock troops. Okay, but still not great ability to manufacture weapons locally. Heavy reliance on food from outside. Very close proximity to hell. That's it. Next up are the Vostroyans. Hailing from the industrial world of Vostroya, these guys are consistent of firstborn children of the planet. They are by far the best equipped soldiers of any regiment on this list when it comes to the personal soldier level. They are able to rival KRIEG in terms of equipment they are able to manufacture, but due to their relatively low population of only 9.3 billion, they are much more likely to focus on maneuver warfare rather than the static attritional one. They also have probably the most experienced officer corps due to their willingness to reinforce older regiments with new recruits alongside excellent medical care, courtesy of their closeness with Mechanicus. Speaking of Mechanicus, I didn't know whether or not I wanted to include them due to a small little theory that posits that Vostroya may be a home to, an insignificant tiny force called the Titan Legion, but I couldn't find any definitive proof, so no Titans it is. Okay, let's go over the pros and cons. Pros: industrial world with high tech level. World is also cold with little vegetation and a lot of broken terrain such as mountains. They have the best equipped personnel. They have excellent officer corps. They also have no inexperienced regiments. Alcoholics in my family don't drink, they drive. Cons: alcoholics in my family don't drink, they drive. They have a relatively small population. Planet is also not as harsh to live on for the enemy force as others on this list. Next up we got the Klansmen, the greatest greenskin haters of the 41st millennium, the Armageddon Steel Legion. These bad boys are basically World War II Americans, but in space. Armageddon is an industrial world which produces rivers of armored vehicles. Almost every Steel Legion regiment is fully mechanized with elements of armor such as tanks for rapid breakthrough operations. They are also more often than not provided with super heavy tank platforms such as Bane Blades, even on a smaller unit level. Armageddon as a planet is relatively livable with decent amounts of vegetation, so the invading enemy force would not be as fucked upon landing as example on CATACHAN or KRIEG. Number of people living on the planet isn't exactly known, but it's theorized to be in low billions. When it comes to Steel Legion soldiers, I'm gonna be real, they ain't anything special. They're either high world criminals from lower levels of the Hive City, conscripts or volunteers. Their strength lies, as I said already, in their mobility due to their mechanization and sustainability of combat operations due to their motorized logistics. Their tactics and strategies are just World War II Blitzkrieg or Bewegungskrieg depending on which word you like more, with some elements of more modern tactics such as thunder runs. They basically use coordination between armored elements and mechanized infantry to achieve a breakthrough, whilst SPA and SPAA pieces provide support. Motorized elements are supposed to either deliver supplies or hold ground if need be, so let's go over their pros and cons. First up, pros. They have an excellent manufacturing base, great ability to sustain prolonged combat operations. They also have great ability to coordinate between different branches, as well as having great tactics and strategies. Now on to the cons. They have relatively low quality of guardsmen compared to other regiments on this list. It's easy for the enemy force to establish an FOB on the planet. They are almost always at a low intensity war with the surviving orcs on the planet. Next up are the retards, calling themselves Mordian Iron Guard. I don't know what's up with most of their soldiers, they must be lobotomized or something, because whilst every other regiments are using maneuver warfare or massive trench lines, these lobotomites still think that Napoleonic era line formations are the peak of warfare. They fight in line formations, shoulder to shoulder, still still using volley fire with either their semi or fully automatic weapons. I guess it's a good thing that they mostly fight unwashed masses that use slingshots as their primary weapons, because any force with a single artillery piece could probably wipe out an entire company with a single fragmentation shell. Oh yeah, they also don't use any camouflage because Maona and my tradition bullshit. I'm guessing that the enemy snipers also get a new tradition whenever the Mordians come. Tradition of going to a sniping position with 30 bullets and returning to base with 60 kills. Due to the ability to kill both the dumbass at the front as well as the retard in the back. God forbid these clowns ever face an armored vehicle, their tactic for that is probably still to fix bayonets and form a square formation. Mordia is also a planet constantly in a civil war, so take that into account as well for this scenario. One thing that came up to me right now, people complain that Ultramarines have massive plot armor, but let's say if Ultramarines plot armor is the size of an apple, Mordian plot armor is the size of a fucking moon. They managed to fight off a chaos invasion whilst being in the midst of the semi-civil war. They got invaded by a fucking death guard supported by greater demons of Nurgle, and without gas mask, these guys managed to somehow repel them. There are two explanations as to how this was able to happen. Either Games Workshop was glazing them to the ends of the earth, or more likely Mordians just lied about it. You can decide which one is true by yourself. If you are a Mordian fan, that's okay. We live in a free country where you are allowed to have wrong opinions. With all that said, let's rank these guardsmen from the worst to best. Coming in at number 6 spot are the Mordians. The only thing going for them without plot armor glaze is their decently large population of 12 billion. Until you realize that most of those people are hungry working masses that would immediately side with the opposing army in case of invasion. I mean, there are already constant low to medium level insurrections happening on a daily basis on the planet. Next up are controversially the CATACHAN. If this list was about regiments without support of their homeworld, Rambos would be number 1, but for this scenario they just don't have the manpower. Even if their one soldier is worth 100 Kriegsmen, that doesn't matter because Krieg has 1000 and they are much faster to replace. CATACHAN as a planet is incredibly hard to conquer, but with enough resources, nothing is impossible. I could definitely see Kriegsmen jumping into the CATACHAN Devil's mouth to blow it up from the inside. I mean, they are already doing it to the Tyranids in Octarius. Slightly above them, and I do mean slightly, are the CADIANS. Even though CADIANS are lower in number, their troops are several times better. But again, in my opinion, CADIANS are only slightly better in power. They are pretty interchangeable. It's quality versus quantity debate. At number 2 are the heavy drinkers, the VOSTROYAN firstborn. Best equipped soldiers and ludicrous amounts of equipment, as well as professional officer corps. But Kriegsmen will still take the first spot. They simply have more manpower and in my opinion they have a better manufacturing base, alongside having a better defended planet. Okay, that's it. If you disagree, type it in the comments and I'll see you fuckers in the next one. Till then, goodbye.